All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming to our second in a two-part series with elected officials to protect America and our offshore wind series, a webinar series for local elected officials in New York and New Jersey on offshore wind. We're so excited to welcome you and have you here today. And my name is Dominic Frongillo, co-founder and executive director with Elected Officials to Protect America, also former council member in Caroline, New York, and served as deputy supervisor as well. So we're so excited to have such an amazing panel today. Just a little bit about Elected Officials to Protect America. We are a network of state and local elected officials across the country on climate, ensuring a robust response to the climate emergency, and environmental justice, and protecting our lands and waters. And our commitments are that our elected officials are public servants and have the responsibility to steward our communities, our democracy, and our living planet and environment. And that when crises like the climate emergency, like climate justice come along, it's the responsibility of our elected officials to step up courageously in leadership to lead a solution to those problems. And by joining together across jurisdictions, across municipal boundaries, state boundaries, that we can accomplish a lot together to ensure a safe, prosperous, and just future for us all. So we're so excited to have this webinar today on offshore wind, which, as folks know, is a huge emerging issue. As we know, in order to save the planet from catastrophic climate catastrophe and extreme weather events, we must stop using fossil fuels. And offshore wind is going to play an immense role in decarbonizing our power grids, not just for electricity, but also to make green fuels like hydrogen for shipping, cargo shipping, aviation, and steel making. And Bloomberg, to give you a small example, has projected that offshore wind around the world is on track to hit over 500 gigawatts in collective installations by 2035. That's a tenfold increase from 2021. So this is a massive emerging industry that has the chance to create thousands and thousands of jobs, projected over 17,000 jobs, which we'll get into more today. And just in the United States alone, 2,000 gigawatts of energy exists offshore in the United States. That's more than twice the entire electric generation of the entire US electricity grid. So this offshore wind alone can power America. And according to Offshore Wind for America, just in New England, off the coast of New York and New Jersey and other states, we can project more than 5 times our electricity demand from offshore wind by 2050. So we can become a net exporter, the Saudi Arabia of wind, although that might not be the best analogy right now, but we can become a net exporter as a region. So this really is offshore wind's biggest lever that we can pull to reduce our emissions, address the climate emergency, meet our energy needs, and grow prosperity in our economy simultaneously. And in fact, it's projected to be a $1 trillion industry by 2040. So with no further ado, today's conversation will be focused on, all right, the first part of our series was, okay, what's the technology? What are some of the environmental considerations and benefits of offshore wind? Today, we're focusing in on what are the economic and workforce considerations and benefits for offshore wind. So we're so excited to have an illustrative panel for you today to dive into these issues. Our first panelist is Nicole DiPaolo, who's the offshore wind program manager at the BlueGreen Alliance. She leads their national work to deploy offshore wind in a way that's responsible for workers, communities, and the environment. And will be talking with us about some of the best practices for offshore wind build out with a labor perspective. And with no further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Nicole.
Thank you, Dominic. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. And you can see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us today. It is an honor to be here with you all. And thank you for your service in ensuring in our democracy, really. I am the Director of Offshore Wind for the BlueGreen Alliance, and I will be talking to you today about what it means to build a high-road offshore wind industry. So first, some background on the BlueGreen Alliance. We are a national coalition of labor unions and environmental organizations united to solve today's environmental challenges in ways that create and maintain quality jobs and build a clean, thriving, and equitable economy. And so for us, the responsible build out of offshore wind means that it is high road, equitable, and environmentally responsible. So this means an offshore wind industry in the United States that is deployed at the scale needed to achieve our climate goals, maximizes the creation of quality, family-sustaining union jobs throughout the lifetime of projects, expands domestic manufacturing along robust and high road supply chains, delivers community benefits with attention to stakeholder engagement, community partnerships, coexistence with other ocean users, and improving access to benefits for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as low wealth communities, and protects wildlife, fisheries, and marine ecosystems by avoiding, minimizing, mitigating, and monitoring impacts over the course of site assessment and project development, including through the utilization of the best available science and data. So today I'm really focused on these three middle chunks, the high road and equitable piece. So in practice, high road and equitable development consists of these 7 different aspects that I will go in a bit more detail about. So first, ensuring that we are preferencing domestic content within our offshore wind projects. So this is sometimes referred to as Buy America, and it's a long-standing practice by federal and state governments to create a procurement preference for American-made goods when those goods are available in sufficient quality and quantity and are competitively priced. So the manufacturing aspect of offshore wind is going to be the biggest driver of job creation. In addition to really needing domestic supply chains to meet our offshore wind goals, because as Dominic said, by 2035, there's 500 gigawatts of offshore wind planned globally. This is still a pretty new sector. It's been around for 2 decades in Europe, but it has grown tenfold. Or it is expected to grow tenfold in the next 10 years. And so that's a lot of strain on the global supply chains for offshore wind. It has been noted as the biggest challenge to meeting our offshore wind targets is the supply chain constraints. So this is really important. There was also an analysis done by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that estimates that utilizing 100% domestic content would actually create an additional almost 40,000 jobs in deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. So that's a huge number. And New York and New Jersey alone are at 20 gigawatts. So that's almost 30,000 jobs just for the 2 states by prioritizing domestic content preferences. Domestic content preferences also come with waivers. So this isn't saying you can't build the project unless you use domestic content. This is saying, first and foremost, try to source components domestically. And if that's not possible, waivers are issued. And there of course need to be exceptions for, like it says here, if they're not available at sufficient quality and quantity or competitively priced. Then there's union neutrality and labor peace agreements. So we want to make sure that the manufacturing sector and operations and maintenance jobs in offshore wind are quality jobs. For them to be quality jobs, workers need to be able to exercise their rights to organize a union and to bargain collectively. Those rights are guaranteed under the National Labor Relations Act. However, as we have seen in recent years, as there's been an uptick in union organizing, these rights aren't always respected. There are some union busting tactics that big corporations will use to actually deter those organizing efforts and threaten retaliation. And so these agreements that are entered into between a union and the employers and the company help to ensure that workers can exercise those rights that they have, and that should be protected. When it comes to construction, we're talking about project labor agreements or community workforce agreements. So in the construction sector, under the National Labor Relations Act, for construction, workers are able to enter into what is called a pre-hire collective bargaining agreement. So since construction projects can take so long to plan, these pre-hire agreements ensures that there will be a workforce needed to achieve that construction project. Project labor agreements help to reduce project costs, save project public funds, avoid labor disputes, and ensure projects are completed on time. They increase the economic benefits for local economies, help to ensure fair wages, and increase safety. And so these are all really important things for our communities to see that they're going to benefit from these projects. And the only difference between a project labor agreement and a community workforce agreement is that a community workforce agreement has a partnership with a community organization that helps to ensure there are equitable career pathways, that there's appropriate diversity and demographics that are reflective of that place where the construction is occurring, and that everyone is having equitable access to those jobs through that community partner that is overseeing the project labor agreement and the construction project. Related to that is utilizing union training programs and apprenticeship utilization. So we're talking decades of build out with offshore wind. We need to make sure that we have the workforce, not just in the next 5 years, but in the next 30 years. And so ensuring that there is an appropriate number of apprentices per journeyman helps to ensure the longevity of that workforce. So journeymen are highly skilled tradespeople that have gone through many years as an apprentice. And so many states will have requirements for public work projects that there's a certain ratio on each project of apprentice towards to journeyman. A 3-to-1 ratio is a strong ratio that we would recommend. When it comes to union training programs, union training offers paid positions through apprenticeship programs that combine on-the-job training with classroom instruction in a trade. On the industrial side, industrial unions work with employers on joint labor management training programs. And so these programs that are free and actually not just free, but are allowing workers to earn a wage while they are undergoing training is really important. We have such great union training programs across this country. So when we're looking into workforce development, we should first be looking to the union programs and seeing how we can build on those to upskill people to be able to enter into the offshore wind sector. Also, of course, prevailing wage and benefits, ensuring that all workers on these projects are earning a fair wage. So prevailing wage was set by the Davis-Bacon and related acts, a federal policy that requires contractors and subcontractors to pay their laborers and mechanics employed under a state or federally funded project the locally prevailing wage and fringe benefits for corresponding work on similar projects in the area. So these things don't necessarily apply to offshore wind, but we'll talk about how we can ensure that there are these applications so that these high road benefits and standards do make it into the implementation of projects. And then last but not least, local hiring community benefits agreements. So these are two distinct policies, but they can be very interrelated. So local hire is just like it sounds, ensuring that the local community is employed on that project and setting specific targets for local hire. Community benefits agreements can involve local hire. For example, they could be within a community group or a municipality to say that in addition to hiring a certain number of people from that community, that there will also be certain benefits, wages, or training programs that would be offered to folks in the community to give them access to those jobs. So the key thing here is partnership with communities. We do not want to just be assuming, okay, we're delivering this benefit, we have this fund that's available and, at a community college or wherever. We really want to know straight from the community, what are their interests in the jobs and what do they need to access those benefits. Alternatively, community benefits agreements can be just simply an investment in the community, a fund for helping with utility bills. It could be building a park. It could be investing in an after-school program. But the key here is that it's legally binding and that it is developed in partnership with the community. So how do we get these things in offshore wind projects? There are 4 key areas where states can influence the development of offshore wind projects and ensure that development is occurring in a high road manner. So first, in the advisory roles to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, is the federal regulator. They establish leases and oversee permitting. And so, as you all, I'm sure, are aware, we just had the New York Bight auction last year. That auction included lease stipulations for project labor agreements for supply chain. And so those stipulations were really informed by the strong commitments that New Jersey and New York have demonstrated to these high road labor standards that really resulted in BOEM putting forth a lease contract that included these things. And so states can play a role in influencing how those lease contracts are established. And even though we just had an auction in the New York Bight, New York is very ambitious, and so is New Jersey, and we will need more lease areas in this region to be able to meet our offshore wind goal. So there will be opportunities there in the future. And of course, there are the overarching clean energy or offshore wind policies. We really prefer that, to have these labor standards baked into the policy itself. That sets the pathway for projects to be developed in this high road manner, ensures that each state agency understands their role in overseeing the implementation of these labor standards, and ensuring that they get these standards, make it into the state contracts. So that's the third category, is procurement. The procurement of offshore wind projects and establishing the state contract between the offshore wind developer and the state. And so New Jersey just issued their draft RFP in December. New York issued their RFP back last spring or early summer. And so these solicitations, as they're called, are another key way to get these high road labor standards required on offshore wind projects. And these also help to ensure that the public sees all the benefits that the offshore wind projects are going to deliver, because there is a legally binding contract that the developers have to follow through on these commitments. So this becomes especially important in places like New Jersey, where offshore wind development is guided by an executive order. And so that executive order is pretty general, right? It's just has recently increased to the 11,500 megawatts of offshore wind. And so with that, was either 11,500 or 11,000, I forget how it was increased from the 7,500 megawatts. But with that, the state procurement process is where we get those bells and whistles added in. And New Jersey has been really great about ensuring that all of those standards are also included. And then last but not least, permitting. So when offshore wind projects are getting permitted, whether it's the cable landing or some other element of the project, there's a lot of leverage there to say to the developers, well, we want this project, but we want to ensure that communities are going to benefit, that workers are going to benefit. So that's where there can also be negotiation to get specific commitments from the developers at that stage as well. So best practices when it comes to these standards. I'm going to use New York as an example because they have the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act that bakes in these standards. So that policy established a 9,000 megawatt goal for offshore wind by 2035. It also established that 35% of the benefits of climate programs in New York must go to disadvantaged communities, and to aim even higher with a goal of 40% of overall benefits going to disadvantaged communities. So this is really what influenced and inspired the federal Justice 40 that we've seen under President Biden. In this policy, the state also affirmed that it is in the interest of the state to ensure labor harmony and promote efficient performance of work on climate change related sites by requiring workers to be well trained and adequately compensated, and to advance equity goals by ensuring quality employment opportunities in safe working environments. So high road labor standards is a key way of how we get there. And then in 2021, in the state budget, two key pieces were enacted into law. And the first is requiring that all clean energy projects pay a prevailing wage for construction, and that there's a project labor agreement for all construction of the project. In addition, it set a requirement, what they call the New York Buy American law, that any project that is 5 megawatts or greater must use American steel and iron where feasible. And so how this panned out in the solicitations is that there was an explicit requirement in the 2022 solicitation that there must be a PLA for project construction, as well as the construction of any facility that is funded in whole or in part by New York State funding. So that's a key piece, because even though manufacturing jobs are long-term jobs that create even more jobs for the state, the construction of those manufacturing facilities also provides more jobs as well, so ensuring those are quality. And then additionally, all laborers, workmen, and mechanics performing construction activities, including in federal waters, including but not limited to assembly, staging, installation, erection, and placement of the project and its electrical interconnection, as well as construction activities related to startup and commissioning of the project, whether through long-term or short-term employment, must be paid wages and benefits no less than the prevailing rates. So we really like that highly specific language calling out each piece of project development and ensuring that there will be the prevailing wage and benefits. In addition, the state invested $500 million to offshore wind ports, manufacturing, and supply chain infrastructure, and required supply chain investment plans that would support the development of a strong local supply chain that will not only create jobs for New Yorkers, but help bolster the state's standing as a regional hub for offshore wind manufacturing. And they set a minimum requirement for U.S. steel and iron for all projects awarded to encourage domestic steel production and requiring developers to provide opportunities for U.S.-based steel suppliers to participate in the growing offshore wind industry. And then lastly, they encourage proposers to submit plans to repurpose existing fossil-based electric generation infrastructure in alignment with the state priorities to enhance future reliability and support more renewable energy on the grid. So with that, proposers must submit a timeline and studies to support the proposal that considers local requirements and plans to address the just transition of plant workers. So that's really key here. We know that workers are going to be displaced, so making every effort to ensure that they are receiving benefits, that they are given opportunities for jobs that they can transition into is key. And as a result, we saw that the Rise Light and Power LLC announced plans to transition Long Island City's Ravenwood Generating Station, New York City's largest power generator, into a clean energy hub, while also maintaining the unionized workforce from the Utility Workers Union of America, Local 1-2, and drive economic investment into a historically underserved community. So ensuring that the community is engaged, that the unions are engaged in this transition, and that we're creating quality jobs, that is key. And so that is my presentation. I hope that this was enlightening to highlight some of the key provisions to ensure that there are quality jobs for both communities and workers alike. And here is my contact information. If you have any questions or would like to discuss any of this further, please do not hesitate to reach out to me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole, and for that very enlightening presentation and certainly inspiring as you've articulated how New York and New Jersey are really positioned to lead America's transition to offshore wind power, and really how we can develop that offshore wind power in a way that's responsible to our communities, our workers, and the environment. And you're pointing out how labor standards and baking into the state's policies and procurement contracts and permitting is so important. And giving the New York example shows how we really can lead the country in moving this forward. So thank you so much. Well, with no further ado, to our next speaker, who is Lovinia Reynolds. Lovinia is the Energy Democracy Coordinator at Uprose, which is Brooklyn's oldest Latinx community-based organization, internationally recognized. And her work is really on the intersection between racial justice and climate justice towards a just transition. And will talk with us about her work with Sunset Park and the opportunity presented with offshore wind in a frontline community. So with no further ado, Lovinia.
Hi all, thank you so much for that introduction. I am going to share my really quickly. Okay. Oh, that didn't, okay, there we go. Awesome. Can everyone see my screen? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for the invitation to speak with you all. Truly honored to be here amongst these wonderful panelists. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about Uprose and our work in the offshore wind industry, and kind of, I know Nicole talked a little bit about New York, specifically on Brooklyn, which is where Uprose is located. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right, so Uprose is Brooklyn's oldest Latinx community-based organization. We are intergenerational, multiracial, and we're women of color-led organization. We work specifically at the intersection of racial and climate justice, and our goal is to operationalize a just transition in Sunset Park. And for those of you who don't know, Sunset Park is located on the southwest side of Brooklyn. That's where that little sunspot is. And you'll notice that we are a waterfront community. So before I jump into this a little bit more, I wanted to talk about what a just transition is. So we believe that to survive the climate crisis, we need to shift how our economy works. We are currently operating under an extractive economy. We extract resources like fossil fuels. We are based in a consumerist based economy. And right now, wealth and decision-making power is available only to the select few. And our role at Uprose is to transition to an economy that focuses on investing in people, investing in our natural resources, and investing in our communities. So that's kind of guide how we kind of approach the offshore wind sector. So a little bit about Sunset Park. Sunset Park is a Latinx and Asian immigrant community of about 130,000 people. It is an environmental justice community, which means that we have significant environmental justice burdens located in Sunset Park. We have 3 fossil fuel peaker plants. We also have the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, which brings about 130,000 trucks and cars through our neighborhood every day. That being said, we have a lot of great things about Sunset Park. There's a huge amount of cultural diversity. We also have New York City's largest significant maritime industrial area, which we believe is a key point for facilitating a just transition in Sunset Park. So a little bit about this waterfront. About 10 years ago, there was a proposal by some developers to rezone the industrial waterfront to support luxury housing, hotels, and retail activity. This project would have likely resulted in accelerating the gentrification of Sunset Park, and so it faced heavy opposition led by grassroots organizations such as Uprose. We figured that we couldn't just oppose this project, we also needed to provide a viable alternative, and that led to our grid plan, which is our Green and Resilient Industrial District. The goal of this plan was to preserve the industrial character of Sunset Park's waterfront, to retain family-supporting working-class jobs and a walk-to-work community, to support green industrial innovation, and promote climate resiliency and a circular economy. So we ended up actually winning that fight. Industry City did not get rezoned, and that actually paved the way for the introduction of offshore wind into Sunset Park. Because this area wasn't rezoned, in May of 2022, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which I'll go back a second just to show you where that is. If you can see my screen, that's right around here. The South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, an offshore wind company, announced that they would lease the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal as a staging and assembly site for their wind farm in the New York Bight. That site will also serve as the staging and assembly site for a number of other offshore wind companies that will be located in the Bight as well. And something that I always like to point out is that our grid plan explicitly named offshore wind as one of the potential uses for our industrial waterfront. So, as a result of community activism, we now have this massive industry coming into Sunset Park that we believe will deliver a significant number of benefits to our community. So Nicole already talked a little bit about New York State's goal for 9,000 megawatts by 2035. This industry is also going to bring about 18,000 new jobs to the state. which is just to say that this is a huge opportunity and we're kind of calling it a bit of a green gold rush. So we have a responsibility to, again, make sure that the offshore wind industry is following a just transition principles. So what does that look like? A just transition requires community leadership. So right now, Uprose operates on what we call co-governance, which means that we are equal partners between state and local governments, as well as the offshore wind developers. Right now, Uprose sits on the New York City EDC's Offshore Wind Advisory Council, where we help to kind of shape and guide what the offshore wind industry will look like in New York City. We also recently published principles for a just transition in offshore wind in partnership with CJA, which is the Climate Justice Alliance, is a national organization of grassroots organizations in the United States, as well as a couple of other organizations, for example, Taproot Earth. They're located in the Gulf South and will likely also be experiencing significant increase in activity in offshore wind. And I can drop the link for those principles after this presentation. So what about what do community benefits in Sunset Park need to look like? So at the very least, we believe that climate solutions cannot be environmental justice problems. And what does that mean? We cannot replicate the patterns of the fossil fuel industry, where we have energy infrastructure located in frontline communities with none of the benefits being directed towards those communities. So that means that we need jobs. Sunset Park residents should be prioritized for jobs, not just at the entry level, but also the executive level, not just in the manufacturing sector, but also in HR management. We really believe that job access should be what we call horizontal and vertical. We also believe that infrastructure can't contribute to the numerous existing health burdens that we already have in Sunset Park, as I mentioned. This is an environmental justice community. So we definitely prioritize having zero emission infrastructure. One of the great things about the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is that the operation and maintenance base is going to be fully electrified, and the boat that they plan to use to service their farms will be a hybrid boat that will convert into electricity as soon as it passes under the Verrazano Bridge, which we think is great and definitely reflects the needs of the community. We also are very keen on making sure that offshore wind does not promote false solutions. And I know that hydrogen has been a big point of discussion in New York State, but for us, we know that combustion of hydrogen leads to an increase in the type of pollution that has actually harmed our communities for the past decade. So we're very adamant that offshore wind is not used to promote the combustion of green hydrogen, particularly in our communities. So in addition to not doing bad things, we believe that community benefits should be transformative. Uprose is in the business of developing scalable and replicable community-led models for a just transition. We believe that our community-led models are informed by communities, but can also be copied and replicated based on the needs of other communities in the city and the Northeast region. So what are some of these transformative projects that we've been thinking about? As an example, we have, we have our Just Transition Waterfront Exchange. This was a need expressed by our community members for a community center and cultural learning space, and where folks could learn about each other's cultures. As I mentioned, Sunset Park is an extremely culturally diverse neighborhood. Be able to access information about career development in green industries, and learn about methods for climate resiliency and disaster preparedness. This waterfront exchange would also include barges that support urban agriculture and local access to food. We've also thought about developing an industrial microgrid. This would help develop or provide affordable and reliable energy sources to retain industrial businesses in the Sunset Park waterfront. These businesses help to employ local residents, which means that we'd be able to maintain, again, those family supporting jobs and a walk-to-work community. Some other examples include community-owned solar. We're developing solar projects that provide energy bill discounts for our residents and small businesses who can't put solar on their rooftops. We're also developing our Regenerative Economies Industrial Ecosystem Development Initiative, which would accelerate cooperatively owned manufacturing businesses that can plug into the green economy. And the goal of that is to be able to develop a robust economy of green industry that can help support the broader New York region as it transitions to renewable energy. So this is all to say that community leadership is super important in this transition. We have the ideas, we know what our communities need in order to enable a just transition, and offshore wind can help to support that. So, key takeaways from this. Community leadership is needed for a just transition. We deserve to be at the table in making these decisions about how offshore wind is deployed in our communities. Jobs and benefits must go to our host communities. Specifically for Sunset Park, job access is super important, and making sure that we have access at all levels of any offshore wind development company. And the community benefits that do come to Sunset Park must be transformative and prioritize community leadership. So that's all I have at the moment. Feel free to follow Uprose on any of our social media. You can also reach out if you have any additional questions. I'm happy to take questions after this. And I'm happy again to drop our just transition principles in the offshore wind sector in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lovinia, for your presentation. I think really an inspiring example of how offshore wind can really be an opportunity to, in your words, to be transformative, both economically and for environmental and economic justice for host communities, broadly defined as the opportunities for offshore wind are really across the state and across the region. And you calling out the importance of equal partnership and for communities that will be hosting this infrastructure, hosting the ports, hosting the manufacturing and workforce training and other aspects to be at the table as an equal partner. I think that's a really important standard to set as you've laid out, and also how the work that you're doing is really a model for communities across the country in offshore wind. So thank you for being a pioneer and making this happen. Our next speaker, moving upstate up the Hudson River, is Mayor of Albany, Cate Sheehan. Mayor of Albany, Cate Sheehan has been a strong spokesperson for the revitalization of the Port of Albany as an example of how the benefits can be across the state. For the port to be a manufacturing hub that for manufacturing the steel towers and other components, and will talk with us about what it means to be the city to be the first offshore wind tower manufacturing facility. So with no further ado, Mayor Sheehan.
Thank you so much, and I'm gonna try to share my screen here. I'm not as good at this as my two previous presenters, but I think I got it. Okay. And now I just have to go to mode. Can all of you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why it's not going into slideshow though. And I keep getting a message that my Zoom is quitting.
Okay, so we can see you.
You can see me. Okay, sorry. I don't know what's happening with my Zoom, but let me try this again. You can't see my presentation anymore, right?
No, it dropped. We can still see you and hear you great.
I can share for you if you'd like.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Let me just do it in then. So thank you so much for having me. We are really thrilled in the city of Albany to be part of this transition in our economy. And I agree with our previous speakers that we have to ensure that we're doing this in a way that creates jobs and creates justice in our communities. When Albany was selected as the site for the offshore wind tower manufacturing facility, it really helped us to address a huge injustice in the neighborhood that is immediately adjacent to the port. and that is truck traffic that continues to pass by one of our housing authority apartment complexes that is really disruptive. And so because of this project, we're going to be able to create an interior road in our port that will allow us to legally ban truck traffic. Right now, because it's a truck route, we can't legally do that. But you know, it was the type of project that we had really been looking for to get the funding to do this. And so the unique thing about this project, though, and I think from an environmental justice standpoint and from a job standpoint that makes it interesting, is that this facility, this 626,000 square foot manufacturing space that is going to be built on over 100 acres in our port, is actually on property that is in our adjoining town. So the port has expanded its footprint by acquiring this piece of property. It will require a bridge to be built to actually access this property. But this property is actually located in a very high income, relatively, predominantly white community, suburban type community. And so one of the interesting things that we came up against was, sort of that suburban NIMBYism, but for a project that actually, because of how you would access this site, is really accessible for people who live in the south end of Albany and actually anywhere in our formerly red line neighborhoods. Being able to access this work site is really important to them. And so we did have to really sit down with the town supervisor. The elected officials were very supportive of this project, but really engaging the community and helping them to understand why we were doing our outreach in the South End, why we were focused on Ezra Prentice, why we were focused on ensuring that we were providing job training and commitments for investment in this formerly red line neighborhood and community. This gives you an aerial view of kind of what I'm talking about. This is our entire port. And so the yellow rectangular area is where this new facility is going to be built. There's a smaller facility that is also outlined in yellow here that is going to be built. And then, right across from the port and going up the hill is the neighborhood that I'm talking about. And so that's the neighborhood that we've really focused on engaging and working with to ensure that we're capturing from them the additional benefits, in additional to this interior road, the additional benefits that they want to see from this project. The commitment, this project does have a project labor agreement. We have committed to 15% local hiring. I think that number will be larger, but again, given the region that we're in and the fact that the town of Bethlehem is actually where this project is happening, I think that 15% commitment to the city of Albany is a strong one. We have the projects and manufacturers have already contributed to a multi-craft apprenticeship preparation program in our South End. And we are looking at 350 new permanent local jobs. And by the way, that 15% commitment to local hiring is in the construction. And again, that's where, we do have challenges with the project labor agreement of hitting those targets because of the workforce challenges that everybody is facing with respect to finding workforce right now. And there is also environmental mitigation contributions that are going to be made. That has more to do with impacts on the river itself, as opposed to challenges with environmental impacts in the surrounding neighborhood. The cost of this project, though, and I will say this project is at risk because of the difference in the world that we were in when this was first bid and estimated versus where we are now with inflation. And so right now we are working with the project sponsors as well as the state and NYSERDA and the federal government to ensure that this industry is not cut short and delayed any further because of the significant increases that we've seen in labor costs, in materials costs, and just in time that has passed. I think that, when you look at the increase in these project costs and you look at where these costs were when this was bid, that, I think we always have to take a hard look at numbers of companies that are coming in to do business in the state. But I think that this slide really demonstrates the challenge that we're facing here in New York, but this is happening in Massachusetts, in other offshore projects, really seeing these upward pressures on prices. And I think given the urgency of addressing climate change and addressing this industry and really demonstrating to our communities, our local communities who we've been engaging with, about the fact that this new economy is about growing jobs and growing opportunities, that it's really critically important that at the higher levels, at the state and federal level, that we figure this out, because we can't delay any further. We have to move forward. So, this was the original site prior to the project being undertaken. As of today, actually, I think this slide is maybe from a week and a half ago. This is what the site looks like now. So it is ready for the super strong concrete and all of the installation that's going to have to take place in order to be able to build these towers. This is work that includes partners who do a lot of on-the-job training with respect to workforce, and a lot of experience in ensuring that we are moving forward with creating not just jobs, but careers and career opportunities. And so, as I said, right now, this project, as of yesterday, is seeing some headwinds. No pun intended, or maybe the pun is intended, but we remain committed to ensuring that the Port of Albany is part of the future of wind. It is ideally located. The GE, which is a huge wind turbine manufacturing facility, is located, just a few miles away from us. There's another port in Albany County, the Port of Coymans, which is also part of the offshore project. And so I think it's really important that this be about jobs across New York State. I think the opportunities down in New York City are phenomenal, particularly because of the maintenance of these wind farms once they go in. Is going to create jobs for life, generational jobs. And I think that it's a really exciting opportunity. But that's where we are in the city of Albany. It's hard, it's challenging. I do think that in the all of government approach, I've communicated to our friends at the federal level that we have to even get better at making sure that we have seamless transitions, because there are so many federal agencies involved in these projects, whether it's EPA, the Department of Energy, and then the Department of Interior, the licensing, the leases for these wind farms. So these are huge, huge undertakings, and this is just one small part of it, but it's a promise in a community that is really needed and is being embraced, and we look forward to moving forward on as we reduce and eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Sheehan, for sharing your example. And I think the very powerful example of how Albany is really embracing this opportunity as a leader across the state, and how a municipality can move forward and really make a contribution to the entire region and moving forward offshore wind, and how the benefits extend across the entire state and well inland as well. And thank you for your leadership on this very important issue. And Albany will certainly be a leader and a model for the rest of the country on how to develop offshore wind. If you are able to stay for questions, Mayor Sheehan, that would be great. We do have a question. If not, I can drop the question for you now. If not, we can move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Caren Fitzpatrick, Atlantic County Commissioner in New Jersey, and on our Leadership Council for Elected Officials to Protect America in New Jersey. And she will speak to some of the New Jersey Wind Port, which is a project on the nation's first purpose-built offshore wind marshalling port. And over to you, Commissioner Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Dominic. Thanks again for having this webinar. I think it's really important for us to get this information out to the public so that they can see all that's going into take the Eastern Seaboard off of fossil fuel into clean energy and create new economies as well. So as it was stated earlier, the state goal for New Jersey is to have 11 gigawatts by 2040. 100% clean energy by now 2035. Governor Murphy got a little more aggressive with that. It was 2050, now 2035. And our first wind farm, Ocean Wind 1, will be reducing carbon emissions by 2.2 million tons annually, which is the equivalent of taking 400,000 cars off the roads every year. Well, this is happening in the southern part of New Jersey, which is quite different than the northern part of New Jersey. We are quite rural, actually. Atlantic City is not what typically southern New Jersey looks like. Lots of farmland, lots of, that's why they call us the Garden State, because this is the garden. So this is a regional benefit. This new industry is a once in a generation opportunity for this area to diversify our economies and provide good paying union jobs that will sustain families by training the people who live around here. Our community college, Atlantic Cape Community College, was awarded a $2.9 million grant to build and create a wind farm maintenance training school in Atlantic City, and our county high school, Atlantic County Institute of Technology, which offers certifications and also union trade training to the students there, received a $1.5 million grant for offshore wind career development. Now, I should tell you that Atlantic City has a mean level of income of less than $30,000. So this is huge. This is huge for our people to be able to get jobs that are going to be $70,000 to $100,000 a year. It will change people's lives. So in addition to Atlantic City and what's going on the shore, the wind port that we were talking about is going to be built and is being built in Lower Alloways Township in Salem County, which is across the river from Philadelphia on the other side of the state. And that's going to provide 1,000 union jobs in building. It's uniquely situated with no bridges, nothing in the way to prohibit barging the pieces, the parts of the wind turbines out to the Atlantic Ocean and out to where they will be installed. And in fact, has access to 50% of all the wind farms on the East Coast to be able to service many more than just Ocean Wind 1. And so I sent over a video that explains the wind port much better than I can. So if we could just start that up, that would be great.
Wonderful. And Duncan, our program coordinator, will be spinning that up shortly.
Wonderful. There we go.
As the offshore wind industry is booming on the East Coast, the state of New Jersey is constructing the first purpose-built greenfield offshore wind port in the United States. The New Jersey Wind Port is an essential infrastructure investment that will generate thousands of high-quality green jobs and offer a platform to realize our clean energy future. New Jersey is perfectly located at the center of the East Coast wind belt and has committed to generate 7.5 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2035. The New Jersey Wind Port is positioned just north of the Delaware Bay at Lower Alloways Creek. The port has open access to the Atlantic Ocean, over 200 acres of flexible land, no vertical restrictions, and is centered near a robust trades and technical workforce. The port can efficiently support co-located marshaling and large-scale manufacturing and is within a day's steaming distance of more than half of U.S. offshore lease areas. The New Jersey Wind Port is being developed in 2 phases. Phase 1 includes a 30-acre marshaling area for component assembly and staging and 2 separate manufacturing sites that will have the potential to accommodate Tier 1 turbine manufacturing activities. Phase 1 construction began in 2021, and the marshaling areas will be completed in 2024 in time to support the first round of New Jersey and East Coast projects, while the manufacturing sites will be complete and ready to house manufacturing tenants beginning in 2025. The sites in Phase 2 will become available beginning in 2026, including more than 100 acres of additional marshaling and manufacturing space. The port will be constructed using union labor under a project labor agreement and will employ hundreds of skilled construction workers over the course of its development. Workforce and supplier diversity is core to the state's project delivery approach, with contracting targets for small minority, women, and veteran-owned firms, and set goals for minority and female construction workers at the site. At full completion, the port will be home to up to 1,500 new manufacturing and operations jobs. By accommodating Tier 1 and Tier 2 component manufacturing activities, the port has the potential to attract and anchor the offshore wind supply chain in southern New Jersey and surrounding areas. This dynamic ecosystem will create additional skilled jobs for working families within the region. New Jersey Wind Port, driving our offshore wind industry forward, sustaining long-term local jobs, empowering a stronger and fairer New Jersey. Learn more about the port and discover how you can be part of New Jersey's offshore wind future at nj.gov/windport.
Thanks very much for showing that. I just want to say that a $500 million investment was made to get the wind port off the ground. It's going to be not only, electricians, but carpenters, laborers, iron workers, all the trades unions will be involved. It's really something that we are in this region are very, very excited about because of the change that is going to affect so many families and lift a lot of people into a better life. Families will be able to live from these jobs. It's really great. And we're very, very happy about the aggressive stance that our governor has taken. We've been chasing this for 20 years. We have some windmills over at our sewage processing plant in Atlantic City. They're 20 years old, and that farm was supposed to be a lot larger, but it got squashed. So now we are not stopping. We are not waiting. We are doing this, and it's going to be beneficial to all of our neighbors in southern New Jersey.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner Fitzpatrick, for sharing that very vivid example of just all of these different pieces that we're learning about today coming together in the wind port, and just how that wind port will be such an important anchor for the entire region. And I also think your point speaks to how this will be an entire regional benefit for not just in one state, not just one community, but how really it's an entire collaboration across the region. And those communities that are participating and making sure they're raising their voices so that this can be done in a way to benefit workers, communities, and the environment will gain a lot and be able to be the forefront and the leaders and to reap the benefits of that prosperity. So thank you for your leadership on offshore wind and making sure that it's done responsibly for all stakeholders. And our last speaker, before we go to our last speaker, I will say that we will do question and answer at the end of our speakers. So please drop questions in the Q&A. We look forward forward to our panelists answering those questions. So our last panelist is East Hampton, Long Island Councilmember Cate Rogers, who will share with us about what's happening in her community with the build out from jobs to climate impacts, and how you're working as a community liaison with offshore wind companies, and specifically about the South Fork Wind Farm project jobs report as well. So Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone on the panel. I mean, one of the great things about attending these is how much I learn from my fellow panelists. So I thank everyone that shared their information, and EOPA for this opportunity. I sit on the town board in the town of East Hampton. We have a wind farm that is moving forward with construction. Our onshore construction part of the high voltage cable under our streets that went under our beach is nearing completion, and the restoration has started. And I think they're anticipating that the wind farm will be online in the fall of this year. So it's very exciting for us. It's been in the works for a long time. We're not part of the state's projections. Our project actually got started before. We are East Hampton is a name that you see in movies and TV shows as the playground of the rich and famous, but that doesn't tell the whole story of East Hampton. Our year-round community lives either at or just above the poverty line, and our town swells from even pre-COVID numbers from about 23,000 to over 100,000 with the visitors that we have come here in the summer. Our tourist season is an extremely important economic engine. As the grid got older and development happened more and more, and energy needs, just with all of our devices, increased, we no longer met our peak demand and started to experience brownouts. And into our communities, you saw placement of peaker plants, which is the nice way of calling a diesel or kerosene fueled generator on the back of a truck that's stuck in a substation and spews out the toxic fumes and greenhouse gases directly into the community. Our local power authority put out a bid for a new power generation, and they received, I think, about 5 proposals for a new power generation fossil fuel plant. Of course, that would not be located in East Hampton, but would be sited in a frontline community, which would, again, as I think it was Lovinia that said, took on the impacts without reaping any of the benefits. And the health impacts are great to those communities. So that's why before I was elected to office, I was an advocate for the wind farm. I ran on, everyone knew that that's the group that I was with, and I ran for office, and with full intention of increasing our renewable energy projects. So our project is very small. It's 12 turbines, 35 miles off the coast of Montauk. We're going to deliver about 132 megawatts of power, enough for 77,000 homes. And so I want everyone to just, who's watching, to think about this sort of pilot program, because I'm not going to talk about jobs that will be created. I'm going to talk about jobs that have been created by this smaller project. And then think in your mind of scaling it up to the larger projects that my fellow panelists have spoken about, and think about the numbers of real job creation opportunities here that are rare in today's world because there are new industries. And many of our communities here are also suffering from the pullout of industries that created the communities here to begin with, such as Grumman. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to do a presentation, a brief presentation on the jobs report from South Fork Wind. Can you all see my presentation? Yeah, because it's hard for me to see it. Okay, so let me see if I can put this into slideshow mode. Come in from the beginning. Okay, so this first picture is for the groundbreaking for the wind farm, and I chose it because the folks in the picture in the very center is Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, who came out for our groundbreaking. Next to her is Governor Hochul, our town supervisor, and then many of the other folks in this groundbreaking ceremony were labor unions. And that was the first and strongest segment, besides people looking to lessen the impacts of the climate crisis, who were in support of this project. The Long Island Federation of Labor and all the labor unions, they need jobs, and they see the transition to renewable energy as the way to achieve the jobs. So this is the ongoing jobs report from this project that's been going on for 2 years in its construction phase. Of course, it was a couple of years before that, going through the permitting process. So Southwark Wind created 500 direct jobs throughout the Northeast, including 225 direct positions in New York alone. The announced supply partnerships to date that apply to Southwark Wind specifically will either create and are enabling nearly 1,400 jobs across the country. Southwark Wind will utilize union labor through all phases of the project's onshore and offshore construction. The photos that I have today are from the actual project. This is the onshore installation of the underground transmission cable. It goes through the hamlet of Wainscott. It comes ashore on Beach Lane. This is an area, I think just on Beach Lane alone, there probably are 4 or 5 billionaires that have summer homes here. This is a very exclusive community. There was pushback in that community, but the overwhelming majority of folks who lived in East Hampton fully supported this project. There was a lot of misinformation on the size of the trench. That is the size of the trench for the transmission cable. And as you can see, it doesn't take up a lane. There was always two-way traffic. The disruption to the community was not nearly what the misinformation said. So the groups that's doing this major construction part is Hoagland Group, which is a local Long Island company, and they're helping to lead the onshore construction alongside with Eversource. This project is a project of Eversource and Ørsted, a partnership. Eversource is an American company, and Ørsted, of course, is a global leader in renewable energy. Approximately 90% of the total contract costs are provided by New York companies. And this construction project alone has created approximately 100 local union jobs. And again, this is for 12 turbines, bringing in 132 megawatts. Think of what that translates into the larger projects that you've seen. The job creation will continue as the research and operations and maintenance facilities that are being built, one in Montauk. One is being leased in Montauk locally, and another one up a little bit up west in Port Jefferson. And those permanent jobs will create, there will be about 100 permanent jobs, direct jobs related to this project created in the region. And as well as a large number of significant indirect and induced jobs. So, you know, when you're seeing all this equipment, when I see the pictures of the parking lots, that just the parking lot areas on the projects that my fellow panelists have put forth, think about the labor and think about the supply chain and the investment into the communities that we're going to get from these projects. Some of the other indirect costs for my town were hotel rooms, restaurants, local businesses that were supporting the construction workers while they were on site. The town also hired independent consultants, scientists to review all of the studies and the testing that Ørsted had to do for the Article 7 process and to create our own easement agreement. So all in all, I don't think East Hampton had any capability of creating these jobs for local, regional, and national folks without this project. And thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Rogers, for showing that example. once again on how this is playing out in terms of creating jobs and workforce and opportunities for the community. And you're absolutely right, that trench is much smaller than the disinformation shows. So I think that shows the importance of telling the story about what's actually happening in communities and showing folks the example. So thank you so much. So we'll now move on to, thank you to all of our panelists. We'll now move on to questions. We have a number of questions in the chat. We'll start off with a question for Mayor Sheehan. Mayor Sheehan, the question is, were there any existing dormant industrial sites that were considered for siting for the manufacturer facility? And pointed out, this person was looking at the slide, the yellow square appears to be a vibrant green zone. So I think it's a question on how the site was chosen.
Yeah, so it's a little deceptive that it was a landlocked piece of property that has an industrial facility to the south of it and a sewage treatment plant to the north of it. So directly across from it is also industrial. When you get just south of the next manufacturing facility, that's where you start to see more of our parks and interaction with the waterfront, or to the north of the port. So it really was a landlocked piece of property that's accessible only by creating this bridge over the Normanskill Creek that's there to be able to actually access it and utilize it. There was no way of accessing this piece of property from from any of the roads. So it was this sort of orphaned piece of property, zoned industrial, surrounded by pretty heavy industrial uses. So we really are looking to maximize the property that is in our existing port and have actually really relooked at the port and in some cases torn down buildings that were in the port that were underutilized so that we can create that space, because we certainly don't want to utilize usable green space with respect to this industry, but we do have a number of opportunities for property that is already zoned industrial and makes sense to be industrial.
Well, thank you for the answer. And I think a follow-up question to you, Mayor, and really all the panelists are, how will the different ports work together? We heard several different examples today. How will the different ports work together to manufacture different components? And is there coordination, and how is that coordination happening?
Well, I mean, I can speak for New York. And one of the things that I love about how New York is approaching this is that, NYSERDA is really looking at the entire state and looking at where the opportunities are and what really makes sense for the industry. And so while, the work that is being done down, further south is work that it only makes sense to happen there, right? It wouldn't make sense to stage the assembly of these towers in Albany. But we can manufacture these towers and send them down the river to then, feed into the facility that we saw from New Jersey, or to feed into the facilities that are being built downstate, to then create those jobs. And I will say, we get some pushback up here because there are folks who say, well, at some point we won't need to keep making towers, right? The permanent jobs, the generational jobs are really in those ports that are much closer to these wind farms. But, we do think that there is going to be a long and robust industry here, or we wouldn't be seeking to become a part of that supply chain. So I think New York State certainly is in how they're thinking about the bids and the partners and being built in New York and all of those qualifications. I loved that the president tied to at least, I think, the CHIPS Act. You got to build daycare. I want that in wind too, right? So, these are things that I think we need to build a successful industry, and we have to do it in a coordinated way where we're coordinating what is the best location for the various pieces of this industry that exist.
Would like to take a crack at that ports and coordination question?
what the mayor said makes sense. Our wind port in Lower Alloways Township is for assembling the towers. And we're going to get the components from the manufacturers. So it just makes sense that, you know, we have to think of this globally, not just in our town, our state, our, you know, this is regional. This is the Eastern Seaboard. And I see us all working together to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner. Moving on to another question, which was, there was recently a letter to New York's governor asking her to increase New York's offshore wind goal, which was signed by activists and environmental groups as well as unions. What do you think about this idea? And is that accelerating that and raising that wind goal appropriate for other states in the region as well?
I can hop in on this one. I think it is a great idea. We know that more offshore wind is needed to meet New York's clean energy goals. And because there is so much planning that goes into these projects, having a longer term vision for build out is going to help in the sense of understanding what additional lease areas might need to be designated in federal waters for construction. And also to the mayor's point about the tower manufacturing and those jobs being temporary, you know, we're not always going to need towers. Well, knowing how many towers we're going to need a a lot more towers for, you know, like with New Jersey, an 11 gigawatt offshore wind goal is hundreds more towers than for a 7,500 megawatt wind goal. And so we begin to be able to better map that out and understand what the longer term vision is. And because these projects are really like 30 years in operation, as we start to understand what that longer term timeline is, then we can also start to map out, well, if we need to maintain, and of course the technology will evolve over the course of decades, right? But we can understand, well, once we start retiring the first phase of projects, then are there going to be plans to rebuild? And so we're not quite in a position yet to understand what is going to come after decommissioning. But I think planning ahead really helps to allow the public and elected officials and all the agencies that go into these plannings to come together and look at things more holistically, and bring the right people together, engage the right people, ensure there's a workforce and people see these jobs as more longer term careers and not just temporary.
You know, I would just like to add that I do think that this is a really important federal question, because we are limited only by the investment that we are able to make and the workforce that we are able to develop. And so we are facing inflationary headwinds that are unprecedented. And my concern is that we hit a pause button, and this is the worst time to pause. We need to lean into this industry. I look at some of the things that we did during the Great Recession, which I'm old enough to have lived and tried to govern through. And I wasn't mayor, but I was treasurer, which might have been worse because I was responsible for the books. But you know, we did some really bold things, right? We bailed out the auto industry, and it paid off, right? Not only did we, you know, we called it a bailout, but it paid off. And I think this is the time for us to be bold, because the rest of the world is moving forward. I want us to be on the leading edge. Americans have to stop thinking about green energy as something that is taking things away from us. And that's, you know, been too much of the mantra of those who deny climate change, or who say, oh, you know, they want us to go to all electric. We can't use our gas stoves anymore. We have to start showing working people that this is about jobs and a future for themselves and their children and their grandchildren. And so, you know, I love asking for more, but we are going to have to make a commitment at the federal level of how we're going to figure out how to pay for it, because states don't print money. The federal government prints money.
Very well said, Mayor. And that speaks to the importance of local and state elected officials as well as making that case to the federal government. And that's part of our work with elected officials to protect America, is organizing those collective voices collectively to make that case. We have time just for one or two more questions, and then I'd actually like to invite our panelists to stay on right after the webinar as well. Please let us know if you have a conflict to be able to stay on just a couple minutes after. The last question, maybe I'll combine them together because they're very similar. It's a question for Lovinia. Are the current policies and projects that are moving forward in New York and New Jersey enough to ensure that we get a just transition in offshore wind? And we often, on a related question, we often hear about conflicts between environmental justice communities and labor, and we certainly experience that in some of our work in other states. How are those differences being navigated in the example spoken today?
Sure, those are great questions. I can start with the environmental justice and labor tension. I think that's something that's really difficult to navigate. I think we're still figuring out how to do that. It involves being able to have conversations with unions and other folks in labor, and talking about the benefits that will be going to workers. And also providing, a climate justice lens or perspective on why we're making the decisions that we're making. I know it's been helpful that our executive director has been on the New York City EDC Offshore Wind Advisory Council, because it means that we're in the room with labor unions and able to have these types of difficult conversations and explain where both folks are coming from. I think at the end of the day, we have very similar goals, which is to make sure that folks are paid well in long-term careers in economies that are healthy and thriving. I think it might just be a matter of how, and being able to sit down and have those conversations, I think, are really important. For the other question, do I think that there are sufficient policies? Policies, I don't know that there are. I think we have a good foundation. I think the CLCPA was an incredible step in the right direction. I know that Uprose is working with a statewide coalition to pass bills that will now fully implement the CLCPA. But at the end of the day, I think, there is no specific mandate requiring offshore wind companies to work in partnership, like true partnership with grassroots community organizations. I think there's a lot of greenwashing that can happen. I think that we found so far that it's really company to company and how they approached their community partnerships. We found some that are really intentional about being true partners, and some that maybe aren't quite up to speed yet. But there seems to be an openness there, which I appreciate. Would I say the policies are in place? Not quite there, but we're pushing, and I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, if I could just add to that important statement, the other side of the coin for these job opportunities that this developer is helping with, and all developers should have to make a commitment to it, is creating the programs for the job training in the community colleges, and having that accessible, a tuition accessible, free of charge to everyone. That's a really important part of this, so that folks have the opportunity to train for the wind technician jobs and all of the green energy jobs that are coming forward. This developer has made a commitment and created programs at local community colleges in Suffolk, but I think that should be part of the statewide mandatory plan as well.
Yeah, and just if I can add one little thing to that, ensuring that there's job placement after community colleges, after graduation, and that the programs are informed by what the needs are and what the interest is. So I loved the way that Lovinia said the horizontal and vertical. So we're talking not just manufacturing, we're talking HR, we're talking all of these things, all, from, the line workers to executive level. And so I think understanding, well, what are those opportunities if there's, 50 HR jobs and 300 manufacturing, well, that doesn't mean we should deprioritize HR, but we should make sure that we're matching up those skills. And so folks aren't thinking that they're going to be able to get, that they're going to all be able to necessarily have job placement in areas that might not actually have the most opportunities. And so really having those programs informed by the job projections, and then requiring partnerships with companies so that there's interview on completion and things like that, partnering with community groups to ensure that there's recruitment into those programs, wraparound services, childcare, all of those things that are needed to succeed. That's huge. One of the things that we have in Rhode Island, where I live, is a pre-apprenticeship program called Building Futures. And so sometimes apprenticeship programs can require geometry and math that folks haven't used in a long time, or maybe never did. And so it can actually be a barrier just to get into the apprenticeship program. So the pre-apprenticeship program provides those skills building, still allowing people to earn while they're learning and get paid while they're doing the pre-apprenticeship, but then be able to are nice and rigorous so that it ensures that folks upon completion of the program are actually going to want to be in the apprenticeship programs where they're more exposed to the elements and working outside and doing whatever that trade entails. And so the success of that program is so much due to the suite of services that folks are able to get within that program so that they have the support they need to complete it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and to all of our panelists. I'd like to thank all of our panelists as we close the webinar for really an amazing and enlightening presentations, very vivid. Thank you so much for showing the slides and examples of what this transition and this build out, this responsible development looks like in action. And I would love to close our webinar and ask our panelists to stay on just for a couple of minutes so we can record some statements. And thank you to all of our participants for joining, and we will be following up with resources after the webinar as well. So thank you so much, and we'll ask our panelists to hold.